Princess Crystal or the Hidden Treasure in the Diamond Fairy Book by Isabel Bellerby. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. There were the four kings: the king of the north, the region of perpetual snow; the king of the south, where the sun shines all the year around; the king of the east, from whence the cold winds blow; and the king of the west, where the gentle zephyrs breathe upon the flowers, and coax them to open their petals while the rest of the world is still sleeping. And there was the great dragon, who lived on top of a high mountain in the center of the universe. He could see everything that happened everywhere by means of his magic spectacles, which enabled him to look all ways at once, and to see through solid substances. But he could only see, not hear, for he was as deaf as a post. Now the king of the north had a beautiful daughter called Crystal. Her eyes were bright like the stars, her hair was black like the sky at night, and her skin was as white as the snow which covered the ground outside the palace where she lived, which was built entirely of crystals clear as the clearest glass. And the king of the south had a son who had been named Sunshine on account of his brightness and warmth of heart. The king of the east had a son who, because he was always up early and was very industrious, had been given the name Sunrise. The king of the west also had a son, perhaps the handsomest of the three, and always magnificently dressed. But as it took him all day to make his toilette, so that he was never seen before evening, he received the name of Sunset. All three princes were in love with the Princess Crystal, each hoping to win her for his bride. When they had the chance, they would go and peep at her as she wandered up and down in her glass palace. But she liked Prince Sunshine the best, because he stayed longer than the others, and was always such excellent company. Prince Sunrise was too busy to be able to spare her more than half an hour or so, and Prince Sunset never came until she was getting too tired and sleepy to care to see him. It was of no use, however, for her to hope that Sunshine would be her husband just because she happened to prefer him to the others. Her father, the stern and blusterous old king, with a beard made of icicles so long that it reached to his waist and kept his heart cold, declared that he had no patience for such nonsense as likes and dislikes, and one day he announced, far and wide, in a voice that was heard by the other three kings, and which made the earth shake so that the great green dragon immediately looked through his spectacles to see what was happening. He who would win my daughter must first bring me the casket containing the hidden treasure, which is concealed no man knows where. Of course the dragon was none the wiser for looking through his spectacles, because the words, loud though they were, could not be heard by his deaf ears. But the other kings listened diligently, as did the young princes, and poor Princess Crystal trembled in her beautiful palace lest Sunrise, who was always up so early, should find the treasure before Sunshine had a chance. She was not much afraid of the indolent Sunset, except that it might occur to him to look at some spot forgotten by his rivals. Very early indeed on the following morning did Prince Sunrise set to work. He glided along the surface of the earth, keeping close to the ground in his anxiety not to miss a single square inch. He knew he was not first in the field, for the Northern King's proclamation had been made towards evening on the previous day, and Prince Sunset had bestirred himself for once, and had lingered about rather later than usual, being desirous of finding the treasure and winning the charming princess. But the early morning was passing, and very soon the cheery, indefatigable Sunshine had possession of the entire land, and flooded Crystal's palace with a look from his loving eyes which bade her not despair. Then he talked to the trees and the green fields and the flowers, begging them to give up the secret in return for the warmth and gladness he shed so freely on them. But they were silent, except that the trees sighed their sorrow at not being able to help him, and the long grasses rustled a whispered regret, and the flowers bowed their heads in grief. Not discouraged, however, Prince Sunshine went to the brooks and rivers and asked their assistance, but they, too, were helpless. The brooks gurgled out great tears of woe, which rushed down to the rivers and so overcame them, sorry as they were on account of their own inability to help, that they nearly overflowed their banks, and went tumbling into the sea, who, of course, wanted to know what was the matter, but, when told, all the sea could do was to thunder a loud and continuous "No!" on all its beaches. So Prince Sunshine had to pass on and seek help elsewhere. He tried to make the great dragon understand, but it could not hear him. Other animals could, though, and he went from one to another, as cheerful as ever in spite of all the no's he had met with, until, at last, he knew by the twittering of the birds that he was going to be successful. "We go everywhere and learn most things," said the swallows, flying up and down in the air, full of excitement and joy at being able to reward their beloved Sunshine for all his kindness to them. "And we know this much, at any rate: the hidden treasure can only be found by him who looks at its hiding place through the dragon's magic spectacles." Prince Sunshine exclaimed that he would go at once and borrow these wonderful spectacles, but a solemn-looking old owl spoke up. "Be not in such a hurry, most noble prince. The dragon will slay anyone, even so exalted a personage as yourself, who attempts to remove those spectacles while he is awake, and, as is well known, he never allows himself to sleep, for fear of losing some important sight." "Then what is to be done?" asked the prince, beginning to grow impatient at last, for the afternoon was now well advanced, and Prince Sunset would soon be on the war-path again. A majestic eagle came swooping down from the clouds. "There is only one thing in all the world," said he, "which can send the dragon to sleep, and that is a caress from the hand of the Princess Crystal." Sunshine waited to hear no more. Smiling his thanks, he hastened away to put his dear Crystal's love to the test. She had never yet ventured outside the covered gardens of her palace. Would she go with him now, and approach the great dragon, and soothe its savage watchfulness into the necessary repose? As he made the request, there stole into the princess's cheeks the first faint tinge of color that had ever been seen there. "My robe is of snow," she faltered. "If I go outside these crystal walls into your radiant presence, it will surely melt." "You look as if you yourself would melt at my first caress, you beautiful living snowflake," replied the prince. "But have no fear. See, I have my own mantle ready to enfold you. Come, princess, and trust yourself to me." Then, for the first time in her life, Princess Crystal stole out of her palace, and was immediately wrapped in Prince Sunshine's warm mantle, which caused her to glow all over. Her face grew quite rosy, and she looked more than usually lovely, so that the prince longed to kiss her, but she was not one yet, and she might have been offended at his taking such a liberty. Therefore he had to be content to have her beside him in his golden chariot with the fiery horses, which flew through space so quickly that they soon stood on the high mountain, where the dragon sat watching them through his spectacles, wondering what the princess was doing so far from home and what her father would think if he discovered her absence. It was no use explaining matters to the dragon, even had they wished to do so, but of course nothing was further from their intention. Holding Prince Sunshine's hand to give her courage, the princess approached the huge beast, and timidly laid her fingers on his head. "This is very nice and soothing," thought the dragon, licking his lips. "Very kind of her to come, I'm sure. But dear me, this won't do. I'm actually going to sleep." He tried to rise, but the gentle hand prevented that. A sensation of drowsiness stole through all his veins, which would have been delightful but for his determination never to sleep. As it was, he opened his mouth to give a hiss that would surely have frightened the poor princess out of her wits, but he fell asleep before he could so much as begin it. His mouth remained wide open, but his eyes closed, and his great head began to nod in a very funny manner. Directly they were satisfied that he really slept, Prince Sunshine helped himself to the dragon's spectacles, requesting the princess not to remove her hand, lest the slumber should not last long enough for their purpose. Then he put on the spectacles, and Princess Crystal exclaimed with fear and horror when, as though in result of his doing so, she saw her beloved prince plunge his right hand into the dragon's mouth. Prince Sunshine had stood facing the huge beast as he transferred the spectacles to his own nose, and, naturally enough, the first thing he saw through them was the interior of the dragon's mouth, with the tongue raised and shot forward in readiness for the hiss which sleep had intercepted. And under the tongue was a golden casket containing the hidden treasure. The spectacles enabled the prince to see through the cover, so he learned the secret at once, and knew why the King of the North was so anxious to possess himself of it. The great treasure being a pair of spectacles exactly like those hitherto always worn by the dragon, and by him alone, which would keep the king informed of all that was going on in every corner of his kingdom, so that he could always punish or reward the right people, and never make mistakes. Also, he could learn a great deal of his neighbors' affairs, which is pleasant even to a king. The princess was overjoyed when she knew the casket was already found. She very nearly removed her hand in her eagerness to inspect it, but, fortunately, she remembered just in time, and kept quite still until Prince Sunshine had drawn his chariot so close that they could both get into it without moving out of reach of the dragon's head. Then, placing the spectacles, not in their accustomed place, but on the ground just beneath, and laying the golden casket on the princess's lap, the prince said as he gathered up the reins, "Now, my dearly beloved Crystal, really mine at last, take away your hand and let us fly, without an instant's delay, to the court of the king, your royal father." It is well they had prepared for immediate departure. Directly the princess's hand was raised from the dragon's head, his senses returned to him, and, finding his mouth open ready for hissing, he hissed with all his angry might, and looked about for his spectacles that he might pursue and slay those who had robbed him, for, of course, he missed the casket at once. But he was a prisoner on that mountain and unable to leave it, though he flapped his great wings in terrible wrath when he saw the prince and princess, instead of driving down the miles and miles of mountainside as he had hoped, being carried by the fiery horses right through the air, where he could not reach them. They only laughed when they heard the hiss and the noise made by the useless flapping of wings. Prince Sunshine urged on his willing steeds, and they arrived at the court just as the king, Crystal's father, was going to dinner, and he was so delighted at having the treasure he had so long coveted that he ordered the marriage to take place at once. Prince Sunset called just in time to be best man, looking exceedingly gorgeous and handsome, though very disappointed to have lost the princess, and the festivities were kept up all night, so that Prince Sunrise was able to offer his good wishes when he came early in the morning, flushed with the haste he had made to assure Prince Sunshine that he bore him no ill will for having carried off the prize. Princess Crystal never returned to her palace, except to peep at it occasionally. She liked going everywhere with her husband, who, she found, lived by no means an idle life, but went about doing good, grumbled at sometimes, of course, for some people will grumble even at their best friend, but more generally loved and blessed by all who knew him. End of Princess Crystal or the Hidden Treasure by Isabel Bellerby.
The Squire's Bride in Fairytales from the Far North by P.C. Asbjørnsen, translated by H.L. Brackstad. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recorded by Peter Dan. The Squire's Bride. Once upon a time there was a rich squire who owned a large farm and had plenty of silver at the bottom of his chest and money in the bank besides. But he felt there was something wanting, for he was a widower. One day the daughter of a neighbouring farmer was working for him in the hayfield. The squire saw her and liked her very much, and as she was the child of poor parents, he thought if he only hinted that he wanted her, she would be ready to marry him at once. So he told her he had been thinking of getting married again. "Aye, one may think of many things," said the girl, laughing slyly. In her opinion, the old fellow ought to be thinking of something that behoved him better than getting married. "Well, you see, I thought that you should be my wife." "No, thank you all the same," said she. "That's not at all likely." The squire was not accustomed to be gainsaid, and the more she refused him, the more determined he was to get her. But as he made no progress in her favour, he sent for her father, and told him that if he could arrange the matter with his daughter, he would forgive him the money he had lent him, and he would also give him the piece of land which lay close to his meadow into the bargain. "Yes, you may be sure I'll bring my daughter to her senses," said the father. "She is only a child, and she doesn't know what's best for her." But all his coaxing and talking did not help matters. She would not have the squire, she said, if he sat buried in gold up to his ears. The squire waited day after day, but at last he became so angry and impatient that he told the father if he expected him to stand by his promise, he would have to put his foot down and settle the matter now, for he would not wait any longer. The man knew no other way out of it but to let the squire get everything ready for the wedding. And when the parson and the wedding guests had arrived, the squire should send for the girl as if she were wanted for some work on the farm. When she arrived, she would have to be married right away, so that she would have no time to think it over. The squire thought this was well and good, and so he began brewing and baking and getting ready for the wedding in grand style. When the guests had arrived, the squire called one of his farm lads and told him to run down to his neighbour and ask him to send him what he had promised. "But if you are not back in a twinkling," he said, shaking his fist at him, "I'll—" He did not say more, for the lad ran off as if he had been shot at. "My master has sent me to ask for that you promised him," said the lad when he got to the neighbour. "But there is no time to be lost, for he is terribly busy today." "Yes, yes, run down into the meadow and take her with you. There she goes," answered the neighbour. The lad ran off, and when he came to the meadow, he found the daughter there raking the hay. "I am to fetch what your father has promised my master," said the lad. "Aha," thought she, "is that what they are up to?" "Ah, indeed," she said, "I suppose it's that little bay mare of ours. You'd better go and take her. She stands there tethered on the other side of the peas field," said the girl. The boy jumped on the back of the bay mare and rode home at full gallop. "Have you got her with you?" asked the squire. "She's down at the door," said the lad. "Take her up to the room my mother had," said the squire. "But, master, how can that be managed?" said the lad. "You must just do as I tell you," said the squire. "If you cannot manage her alone, you must get the men to help you," for he thought the girl might turn obstreperous. When the lad saw his master's face, he knew it would be no use to gainsay him. So he went and got all the farm tenants who were there to help him. Some pulled at the head and the forelegs of the mare, and others pushed from behind, and at last they got her up the stairs and into the room. There lay all the wedding finery ready. "Now that's done, master," said the lad, "but it was a terrible job. It was the worst I have ever had here on the farm." "Never mind, you shall not have done it for nothing," said his master. "Now send the women up to dress her." "But I say, master," said the lad. "None of your talk," said the squire. "Tell them they must dress her and mind, and not forget either wreath or crown." The lad ran into the kitchen. "Look here, lasses," he said, "you must go upstairs and dress up the bay mare as bride. I expect the master wants to give the guests a laugh." The women dressed the bay mare in everything that was there, and then the lad went and told his master that now she was ready dressed, with wreath and crown and all. "Very well, bring her down," said the squire. "I will receive her myself at the door," said he. There was a terrible clatter on the stairs, for that bride, you know, had no silken shoes on. When the door was opened and the squire's bride entered the parlour, you can imagine there was a good deal of tittering and grinning. And as for the squire, you may be sure he had had enough of that bride, and they say he never went courting again. End of The Squire's Bride by P.C. Asbjørnsen, translated by H.L. Brekstad.
Told on the Pagoda, Tales of Burma, a Fable, by Mimosa, read in English. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Two dogs walked in the jungle together. The day was intensely hot. The rays of the sun, hardly tempered with any shade, fell through the towering bamboos and palm trees down on their tired heads. They had come far. The way was very rough, the undergrowth very tangled and dense. There seemed to be no end to it. Their vision in front was obscured by the extraordinary wealth of orchids and green foliage that was gracefully but thickly festooned from branch to branch. Snakes glided away in the deep grass. Monkeys, squirrels, and birds of all kinds contended for the undisputed possession of the different trees. "I'm very much tired. I don't think I can go much farther," said the lady dog, who was small and delicate, to her companion. "So am I," was the answer. "It was foolish ever to have come," grumbled the first. "It was your fault," snapped the second. "I did not say it wasn't, did I?" retorted the other, who, female-like, had the last word. Then they went on in silence for a while. They both felt cross and hungry, and when you are hungry and a dog, bananas are not very satisfying, and they were the only things near. Presently they came to where a small stream flowed. The water was quite warm, but they drank it and were grateful. Then they rested, going on again just when the last rays of the sun still showed above the dusky palm tops. They hoped to reach a village before nightfall, but they were doomed to be disappointed. There was not a sign of any habitation near when the darkness began to close around. The stars twinkled brightly in a clear violet sky of wondrous brilliancy. Close behind them was a tiger's den, empty. They crept in and sank down, too wary to go further. There were signs of it having been recently occupied, but they did not heed them, and gnawed ravenously at some half-eaten bones that were strewn about. Then they curled themselves up in one corner and slept. After a few hours, the lady dog woke up and looked about her. Through the opening she saw the moonlight falling on the countryside outside. Everything was strangely still, save for the distant cry of the jackal and the healthy snoring of her spouse, who reposed in the corner. She felt alarmed. She could not exactly have told why, and awakened her companion, who grumbled not a little at being thus rudely roused from his slumbers. "Supposing," began his companion, not heeding his displeasure, "that the tiger was to return." "What?" cried the listener, sharply jumping up in extreme alarm at the bare suggestion. "Don't make that unearthly noise," said the lady calmly. "I only said supposing, and I was going to ask you what we should do in such a case." "Do? Why, what could we do?" "Nothing, of course," was the somewhat contemptuous reply. Just then an ominous crackling of the branches outside made them prick their ears. Creeping close to the opening, they looked out and saw in the distance a large tiger coming towards them, a white light, clear almost as the dawn, fell about him, showing his big head and striped back. The watchers trembled exceedingly, and their teeth rattled. "There is no time to be lost," explained the lady in a hoarse whisper. "We must trust to his never having seen any like us before, and we must try and frighten him." "Humbug and nonsense! Fancy our frightening a tiger," said the gentleman dog with infinite scorn. "Never mind, we'll try. Use it at the door while I remain here. When I roar, well, you'll see the effect." The dog very unwillingly took up his position at the entrance to the lair, and waited. In a second almost the great beast came slouching along. His gleaming eyes glanced hither and thither, and there was blood upon his mouth. Seeing the dog, he came to an abrupt pause, and stared, then came a little nearer, but very cautiously. Just then there came a cry from within, accompanied by the words, "I am hungry, very hungry, and so are the little ones. They crave more tiger's flesh. Be quick and bring it." The tiger, hearing, waited for no more, but turned and fled into the night. He knew not what he had seen, but the words that he had heard had turned him cold with fear. He flew on away into the wood, not heeding where he went. Then, just as the first rose flush of dawn overspread the sky, he sank down exhausted, with a cold perspiration all over him. He fell into a troubled, weary doze, from whence he was awakened by a banana dexterously aimed, hitting him in the eye. Looking up, he saw a brown monkey swinging itself on the branch of a tree opposite, and regarding him with all that gleeful self-satisfaction which a monkey is alone capable of. "Well, my friend," it cried, mockingly, "what has put you out? You look strangely pale and upset this morning." "I have had sufficient cause," answered the tiger, rising and shaking himself. "For when I went home last night, I found it filled by the most peculiar-looking animals that I have ever seen, who shouted for my flesh." The listener cocked its ugly little head on one side as it munched bananas, and asked, "What were they like?" "Don't ask me," exclaimed the tiger. "I was too frightened to see anything, save that they were white." The monkey flung itself up higher among the boughs, and laughed loudly and long. "If you don't stop that hideous noise, I'll kill you," called out the tiger very angrily, regardless of the fact that he could not get within miles of his tormentor. "Ha ha, my friend," shouted the monkey. "The things that you were frightened of were two poor lean dogs that went by here yesterday. What a great coward you are!" "Coward or no coward, they would have killed me and eaten me." "Eaten you? Oh, you great silly goose! With all your travels, you don't know any more than that dogs can't kill you. You can kill dogs." "I don't believe you," protested the tiger stolidly. "Don't then," said the monkey laconically as he turned a somersault. There was silence for a while. The tiger sat down dejectedly while the monkey watched him through the leaves and chuckled maliciously, continuing to eat noiselessly as he watched. Having once had sufficient himself, he was not indisposed to be a little generous, so, taking some berries in one brown paw, he climbed down nearer the ground, and tendered them to his melancholy friend as an overture, saying as he did so, "Eat and forget for a while." "I can never forget the loss of my dear home," was the melancholy reply. "Nonsense," retorted the other one, who was practical, not sentimental, and who had 100 homes all equally comfortable in the forest. "It's no nonsense," said the tiger, shaking his head. "Well," exclaimed the monkey after a few seconds, "if you really are afraid to go back, which is ridiculous, I will come with you, for I fear no dogs." "I wouldn't trust you," replied the tiger ungraciously. "You have played me a scurvy trick or two before now." The monkey became indignant, saying, "It is just like your mean, suspicious nature to speak so to a friend who, out of pure good nature, is willing to do you a turn. What motive can I have save generosity? No good can accrue to me personally." The tiger grunted an unwilling assent, and began to think seriously of accepting the offer. "Well," he said at last, "if you will consent to be tied to my tail, and to go in first to the den, my back being to you, and face the dog, I am willing." "Agreed," answered the monkey, who was an interfering little creature, and was longing to have his finger in the pie. So they went, the monkey tied to his friend's tail, chattering all the way. "Now," said the tiger, who was sullen and afraid as they came in sight of his lair, "if you don't behave fairly to me, I will murder you. That's all." "Never fear. I won't give you the opportunity of carrying out your amiable intention, because I shall act only as your true friend," replied the monkey. Then he pushed aside the thick growing foliage and entered into the cave, the tiger keeping as far away as possible, his hind legs inside and the rest of him out. The dogs were lying down, but roused themselves on seeing their visitor. "Well, monkey," shouted one, "so you have come at last, but that," looking behind him, "is a very lean tiger that you have brought. Why do you do so when you know that we like them so sleek and fat and—" But the monkey heard no more. He was gone, jerked violently away by the tiger, who, suspecting his fidelity all along, was convinced of his perfidy by the words of the dog's greeting. Away, away he sped, without turning back, over hill and dale. Bump, bump, bang, bang, went the poor monkey's body, while he vainly protested his innocence in breathless, terrified shrieks. At last death came and ended his pain. The two dogs sat and watched them till their eyes grew tired. They laughed greatly as one said to the other, "See what happened to the monkey for interfering in other people's business." End of a Fable by Mimosa.